Hi, today we're going to talk about caregivers, in specifically moms whose children have CRPS and they are the caregiver. Moms and their children have a special bond. Moms are the protectors, the safe place to fall apart, and the natural caregivers. When a child is injured, sick, or in any way disabled, Mama Bear comes out. I'm a mom of a now adult child born blind. So I understand the emotions that a mom goes through when something happens to her child. Just like when we were first diagnosed with CRPS, we go through a period of grieving the life that we thought we would have. Moms of children, whether they be adult children or actual children, also go through the same grieving process. They grieve for the life that they had imagined for their child. They grieve about the gravity of a CRPS diagnosis. They need to be strong for their child and help the child grieve as well. Their role as caregiver evolves. They become a safe place for their child to act out their grief and frustration. My daughter's blindness is not the same as having a child diagnosed with CRPS, but the mom response is similar. I did grieve for the loss of having a normal child. I was the safe place where my daughter could act out her frustrations. She would often scream and cry in my presence because that behavior was not acceptable elsewhere. I learned over time that she did this because I was her safe place to let her emotions out. I felt that my job was to make her as independent a person as possible. I was very protective, but careful not to be a helicopter mom. I made a conscious decision to do things one-on-one with her older sister to be sure that she did not feel left out or less important. When my daughter was born, my older daughter was 2 years old. I included my older daughter in the infant stimulation I was instructed to do for her sister. In the following interview, these amazing moms, you will hear how these women sacrifice for their children without saying it was a sacrifice. Having a child with CRPS affects the entire family. It puts a strain on the marriage. It affects siblings to have a parent need to take their sibling to appointments and treatments. It has a financial ramification. Parents lose time from work for appointments. Parents suffer with financial issues taking their children to appointments and treatments that are not often covered by insurance. Having a child with CRPS and its comorbidities, illnesses associated with CRPS, also means that the parents are needed to be caregivers beyond the normal time period of having children at home. They worry about what will happen to their child once they are unable to care for them or pass away. Just like we, as people with CRPS, have to adjust to new norms, moms of those with CRPS have to navigate not only their feelings with these changes, but the feelings of their child. Now let's listen to what these moms have to say. Hi, today we have some moms whose children, whether it be children, or adults now, have CRPS. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. Sandy, you want to start?
Sure. My name is Sandy, and I am a caregiver for my young adult son who is currently 28 with CRPS.
Awesome. Okay, Stacy. You guys keep
Hi,
switching around on my screen. Sorry.
all right. Hi, I'm Stacy. I have a 25-year-old daughter who also has CRPS. She was diagnosed when she was 16.
Okay. Janet?
I am Janet. I had a daughter with CRPS. She was diagnosed when she was 9 years old, and she passed away when she was 19 years old.
Okay. Oh, Elizabeth?
My name is Beth Young, and I have an adult daughter who is 21, and she has CRPS. She was diagnosed when she was 11, and I'm her caregiver.
Okay. Janet, I think that Hannah is the youngest person that I know that had it, when they were diagnosed. And it looks like Bambi's trying to come on.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but we can't see you.
That's what I'm trying to figure out why that happened. It wouldn't let me do okay, here we go. Let's see.
I'm just going to pause this.
Okay, turn on. Hi, my name is Bambi. My daughter Brittany was diagnosed at 15. Yeah, 15. She passed away 2 months ago.
So I thank you all for being here. When your child was diagnosed, whether it be diagnosed as a child or an adult, how did you deal with it and how did they deal with it? And Bambi, we'll start with you because right now you're at the top of my screen.
Okay. So at first it was a slow progression, not too slow. 6 months was really bad. Denial. And then just really throwing ourselves in physical therapy, which was painful, exhausting. Yeah, at first she was more in denial than we were because, of course, she was 15. She was just trying to live life.
Right. And no 15-year-old thinks that something like that could be happening to them.
Right. It's just sore. We're going to move on. It's fine. Yeah.
Sandy?
So my son developed CRPS at the age of 22, and he was diagnosed at the age of 24. So for the first couple of years, he experienced pain that I just thought was like normal healing. I thought he didn't do his physical therapy good enough after his surgery and that he was paying the price for it. So I guess I would say I was oblivious at that point in time because I didn't even know this was a thing. When he did finally get diagnosed, it's because his CRPS went systemic and became very scary, very, very fast. But it was so dispersed and so many different things that I thought he had 20 different things at one time. I didn't realize it was all one thing. And the CRPS, honestly, at the time was the least of my worries. I had no clue. I was dumb and happy about how bad it could be.
Yeah. Janet?
When Hannah got diagnosed after a year of doctors telling us that there's nothing wrong with her, she was making it up, she was faking, she wanted attention, finally got a diagnosis. And it was horrible and wonderful at the same time because she was finally validated that something was wrong with her and it was a serious, horrible thing. She didn't want it, but it had a name. And the problem is back then, it was really hard to find someone to treat a 9-year-old child.
Right.
Everyone was scared of it because she was such a young child. And that was a big mess too.
Yeah, it took 2 years for me as well. And I was almost relieved because the same thing, it's not just kids. Adults are told it's all in your head. It's all in your head. And even though it's probably the worst diagnosis that could have come out of all of their symptoms, at least there was an answer.
Right.
Elizabeth?
I was diagnosed at 11, and it was a process. She had sprained her ankle and it just never got better. So it was overwhelming for me, I think, at first. And we weren't sure, same as some other of the same stories of like difficulty getting a diagnosis. And hers was intermittent for the first 6 months or so. So again, the doctors thought she was okay. We had to get second opinions to get the diagnosis. And then we had to wait months to go to a pain center to get the actual diagnosis, like, many months later. And she was angry. She was just a young kid and didn't know what was happening and wasn't treated well by multiple doctors, and her school and school nurse, and just really dismissed, like there was nothing wrong. So yeah, it was a very difficult, long road, I'd say, this first 6 months to get the diagnosis. And, but the overwhelming part for me as a parent is I read a lot about it, and different types of it. And cold CRPS, which she has, and, there's just so much to it, obviously. But, at that point, I read some of the scariest things ever, and unfortunately it's what's happened to her throughout her adult life now as it progressed and got worse. But she did a lot of PT, and same as some of the other moms, she was pushed into it, not understood. It was very painful. It just made her more angry and angry because they pushed her through, and did nothing to help her. So I'd say it was pretty difficult the first 6 months.
Bambi?
Sorry. Oh. Sorry. I'm like, yeah, that's me. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I'm just the same things. I mean, it took about 4 months till she got diagnosed because I just wouldn't let up. Which everybody, I mean, we had military doctors. I'm just like, no, I'm staying right here. But again, the physical therapy ended up harming so much in the long run because everybody just kept pushing way beyond what she should have been pushed.
Right.
And then the trauma of, oh my goodness. So we went to one of the pediatric pain programs, which I know a couple of you have also. That was a nightmare.
Yeah.
When we got home, her psychiatrist, which they made her gave her Xanax for physical therapy. I'm like, take that.
Oh, that's going to really make a difference.
Well, I mean, at least she was trying, but Boston was like, whatever. Nothing wrong. Just keep doing physical therapy. You'll be fine.
Stacy?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm back.
No problem.
Sophie was a junior in high school and she broke her foot.
High school?
In high school. Yeah,
Okay.
she was a junior in high school. She had broken her foot at school, came home. I didn't think it was broken. We kind of sat in the parking lot of the emergency room going back and forth. Went in, came back showing it was broken. Went to the orthopedist like a day or two later and they booted her. And she was in and out of a boot for an entire, that was in February when she broke her foot. And we kept going to the doctors, going back to the orthopedist because her leg was turning color. Going, starting from her foot, moving up to her knee, turning color, hot, ice cold, a lot of different symptoms of CRPS, but we didn't have a name for it. He was at a complete loss. And every time we go in, he would just order another test, say, I don't know what it is. I don't understand it. And it took
I would assume you were both very frustrated at that point.
Very frustrating. She was very frustrated because she was a dancer and a runner, and she was getting ready to audition for college for musical theater. So she wasn't able to dance and do stuff over the summertime because she was in a boot.
Right.
And anyway, it took from February to September. We got very lucky. The doctor that we were seeing had a partner. He called him in finally, and he said he knew immediately that it was CRPS.
Yeah.
And but he called it RSD at the time.
Right.
And then from there, we just kind of went to doctor, and then we got into a children's pain center. She did 6 weeks of a outpatient rehab.
Okay.
It made her kind of like, I think, Bambi, you had said, had a lot of negative effects. It did make her functional, but it did not take away her pain. And if anything, it just kind of negated her pain. She wasn't allowed to say the word and things like that. So
it probably doesn't surprise any of you at all, but 50% of all people with CRPS were casted. And that immobilization is what started the process.
And that's actually what they said, that because she was in the boot for so long, it just made it even progress faster for her. And then it finally went full body for her. So
I'm going to just ask if any of your children had some of the comorbidities such as EDS, POTS, gastroparesis? And if so, how that affected the whole scenario?
Can I go?
Sure.
Okay. For Sophie, my daughter, we did not know she had anything wrong, but hindsight being 2020, since then, since she was originally diagnosed with CRPS, she's been diagnosed with a ton of different comorbidities from EDS, mast cell activation syndrome, POTS, dysautonomia. But what we ended up finding out for Sophie was that her Ehlers-Danlos, which she showed the symptoms of
Mm-hmm.
as a child, like she had bruising and very flexible things like that. That's what made her a good dancer, I think.
Right.
And she had hip dysplasia, things like that. But what we found from that was that they believe her Ehlers-Danlos is what caused her foot to break because she wasn't doing anything but walking.
Right.
And then that opened up Pandora's box and CRPS reared its ugly head. And then all the comorbidities followed within year, 2 years, like every year after something popped its head.
And 28 years later, that still happens.
Yeah.
I have never met, and maybe one of you will surprise me, a child who developed CRPS that did not have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome diagnosed after the fact.
No.
Sandy,
do you want to go ahead?
So during Connor's journey, we went down the path of genetic testing, and he did test. He did show anomalies that led the geneticist to believe that he had EDS, but there was nothing conclusive. And honestly, we kind of wore out. And the geneticist was just like one of the things that just went off the list. It was like, well, if we know it, we know it, and we're not going to do anything different.
Right.
But he had so many soft tissue kinds of things that were unusual for someone his age. So even tearing an Achilles, very, very unusual for a 2-year-old. He'd broken his arm just playing basketball. He had 2 hips that tore, like all kinds of stuff that were very odd for someone of his age. So they do suspect it, but if he has it, it's not one of the classical forms because he does not fit the descriptions in any textbook.
Janet?
Yeah, Hannah, 2 months after she sprained her ankle, and we still didn't know she had CRPS, she couldn't eat anymore. We later learned that was gastroparesis. Only
Right.
2 months later, we had no idea that they were connected at all.
Right.
She also finally was diagnosed after many, many, many years with Ehlers-Danlos, POTS syndrome, dystonia. The gastroparesis. Finally, after many years, they said that she didn't want to eat. She,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with her. They did an endoscopy and said, oh, she looks good down there. And also, my son was diagnosed with gastroparesis a few years ago. He's an adult.
But
And
he does not have EDS?
Well, I'm not sure because he doesn't have the injuries like she did.
Mhm.
But I think I have Ehlers-Danlos. I was never formally diagnosed either, but had numerous injuries when I was a child. Broke my foot, ankle walking. My knee, I just had a knee replacement. All kinds of things like that. So I feel like I have it.
And there is a hereditary component,
Oh yeah,
just like there's a
definitely.
hereditary component with CRPS.
Right.
Elizabeth?
Well, Emma actually was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos it all happened at the same time for her. She was diagnosed with that first at age 11. And she also, her whole life, she had injuries, sprains and strains. She broke her wrist, she broke her leg. She was always in PT. Of course, we did not know anything about EDS or CRPS.
Right.
Wearing ankle braces and had been in PT when she sprained her ankle in a basketball game. It never got better. The pain changed. And so at that point, we had to get second opinions to get diagnosis. But both the doctors she had seen throughout her history, an orthopedist, and the second opinion one who did an MRI and found nothing wrong with the foot, sent her to genetic testing and she was tested. She was clinically diagnosed with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos, as was her sister and I at the same time. But her problem, she asked the geneticist, but can you fix my foot? because at this point the CRPS was developing. So she had multiple strains and sprains and things because of the EDS, but then it changed and her foot got cold and stiff and sensitive to the sheet and touch. And that's when we went in and got the finally got the CRPS diagnosis months after that.
Bambi?
So first, Brittany broke her wrist at 15, which led to this whole thing, playing Mario Kart of all crazy things. She was always clumsy. So a personal friend had said something about Ehlers-Danlos early on. I'm like, nah, she's not that flexible. Yes, she's flexible, all the things. Well, about a year later, we saw a geneticist in Boston, and he diagnosed formally the dysautonomia she was having and also Ehlers-Danlos. And then that was the same time she had a brain tumor removed. So she also had that, which they said was central nervous system. But most people didn't say it was the same thing. I'm like, well, if it's central nervous system, so that affected her pituitary, hypothalamus.
Right.
What gland am I missing? But anyway, so she didn't have all her vision, and she had to have all her hormones replaced. She had hypoparathyroidism. Pretty much. I mean, avascular necrosis was really bad.
I've heard
She had some surgeries.
others who had that along with.
So I really feel like that's an avascular connection there, because with the dislocation, like they never can. It's hard to track down exactly what it is because she's on steroids, but they're replacement steroids. But the avascular necrosis could play a big part because of the slipping and sliding. I'm sorry, EDS,
right?
Because of the slipping and sliding of the joints, cutting off the blood supply, which could do it also.
Right.
And I just want that Emma also has POTS and mast cell and cyclic vomiting and multiple other conditions that, as the year after CRPS was diagnosed, then everything else started.
So I want you to tell me how having a child with CRPS has affected your family as a whole. Bambi, you want to go first?
All righty, that was a deep one. Very difficult. So when it happened, my husband was in Chicago and living on military housing, and Brittany had flown up there to be with him for a week before the family came. So there was a distance to begin with. And then I'm being a single parent down here and he's up there. So that's a lot. They did let him come home and take care of what he needed to take care of. But it was, I think we felt like we got through it better until we started seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, like on occasions, because it always came crashing back down again. Like you would have good periods. And I'm always like, okay, enjoy it. I'm not trying to be negative. It's just kind of how it was. You guys know. It's like just, it was really, really hard for our youngest because she was 11 when all this started happening.
Mm-hmm.
So as an adult, we've had lots of conversations, but even though she was taken care of, it wasn't the same as obviously mom being here. And
right. Mm-hmm.
all the emergencies and the stuff she saw and it was a lot.
Yeah.
So it's hard. And it's also hard to watch your child suffer. Oh my goodness.
Exactly.
I just couldn't understand in the beginning. I'm like, I've never heard of it. And I'm like, wait, how can a person be in this much pain where we're at in history? How can we not? I don't understand. Like, why can't we do something?
Well, as an RN, I'd never heard of it.
It doesn't make sense. I'm like, yeah.
Sandy.
So I would say, I have 3 kids. My middle son was away at college, so it had the least amount of impact on him. My youngest son was in high school and was here for the whole thing, especially since a large portion of what Connor went through happened during the COVID years. And so he was right here. We were all in the house together. It gave him extreme anxiety. I still see it in him. He has a lot of fear of illness and of things going wrong, and any kind of symptoms seem to set him off. But just in terms of the family dynamics, I mean, I would say, and I'm sure everyone on this call would say the same thing, our house lived and breathed CRPS, period. That's what we did. Everything revolved around it. During the time that Connor was in the worst part of his journey, I was working full time. I took him to over 400 medical visits. You know, your vacation time at work is gone.
Yeah.
The financial impacts of that, just even things like buying gas for the car, stopping and getting something to eat everywhere you go. It probably has added 2 years to my time to retirement.
Yeah.
If you put it into financial terms, because during the years that I should have been heavy duty bulking up toward the retirement, we went backwards.
Right.
I don't know that people think about that. My husband and I did a very, very big divide and conquer. He was trying to build our family business to get some financial independence, and I was focused on Connor.
Yeah.
It affected my health. I lost 20 pounds without even knowing it. It was everywhere. I missed my son's graduation. There were so many things that I missed. I did not pursue career opportunities. Everything, and this isn't even hitting on Connor. I mean, Connor's world was completely rocked.
Right.
He was during the years that you're getting started, and he was just completely pulled out of life. And it was I'll just say, for the age to get injured, being injured when you should be wrapping up your college and starting your career
Right.
is brutal. Because you haven't accrued enough credits to get any kind of financial support from a disability perspective, but you have no way to make your own income. And so and he's still in that recovery. He's just now getting started again. So there are impacts that I don't think anybody would ever think about.
Yeah. Elizabeth?
Um, I'm not sure it could have had more of an impact at all on my family than it did, because it was so intense. The strain it put on every part of Emma's family structure is just something you could never imagine unless you go through it, because her extended family literally has stopped any contact with her since she developed CRPS, after a period of time where they started accusing me of making it up. And so she's lost an entire side of the family on her dad's side, who she was very close with, spent every holiday and summers. And these people literally think that I'm crazy and that there's nothing wrong with her. So you know, it's unfortunate, and it put a huge strain on my marriage. I became her dad understands it, fortunately, but you know, you become the parent that's doing everything, all the appointments, the insane. I'd say the financial strain for us in our marriage was really difficult, because we're paying a lot for out-of-pocket treatments, and you know, it all catches up with you eventually, all that stress, which you don't realize. But as a parent, the one who's doing the caretaking is just, you're just focused on your child and, you know, taking care of them. So, you know, we have support now. My family's always been great. So just want to make sure I put that in there. My sister, my father, her many supportive relatives, and aunt and uncles and cousins and things. But it's just unfortunate that family can really literally think that you're making this up, and not, they just didn't understand the pain that she was. So on top of being a young child at like 12 years old with all this going on, you know, she had to deal with all that. So it was just sad, really.
Yeah. And Stacy?
For me, it was tough. My husband was just prior to Sophie getting CRPS, my husband became disabled. So I was his full-time caretaker, and I was working full-time. And then after that, you know, Sophie got ill and I became her full-time caretaker. So I was juggling the two of them. My husband passed away. Sophie got 2 years after Sophie was diagnosed, and you know, I became a single parent. But I kind of was a single parent in terms of her care to begin with, because of
Because your
him.
husband couldn't.
Yeah, and it took away a lot of my caretaking from my husband, because I was the one running with Sophie to this doctor, that doctor, this hospital, and she was in and out of the hospital a lot, because a lot of the comorbidities started to kick in.
Right.
And nobody knew what they were. She was in and out of like ICUs and the hospitals and whatnot. So it was very difficult in that respect. And financially, I was taking off time from work to go places. I worked in a hospital. They were they were understanding, but not understanding. They still had a business to run.
Right.
And so it was really difficult. I had a lot of, I had to take time off without pay.
Right.
My husband lost, his full income because then he became disabled. So, financially, we kind of fell apart. Um, Extended family. My parents were wonderful. They were very helpful, but the rest of my extended family, everybody was nice and understanding to a point.
Mhm.
Because as we all know, it's a invisible illness for a lot of people at the beginning, or at least for Sophie. She hides it well.
Yeah, I
It
think we
wasn't
all
until
do.
she ended up, yeah, it wasn't until she ended up in a wheelchair, because she's in and out of a wheelchair now. But it wasn't until she was actually in a wheelchair. And then some people thought, oh, she was just being lazy. Like, well, you can walk. Why aren't you walking?
Yeah.
And things like that. And even to this day, like with some of her treatments that she gets, like, just for instance, for today, I was discussing it with a relative, and the commentary was, well, can you just stop it? Like, why do you have to keep going? Like, I don't understand. Like, at what point will this stop for her? And no matter how much I've tried, I'm beating a dead horse, this is not going to get better. We can manage it. And hopefully, like, she has portions of her life that are better than others, but it's not going to just miraculously be healed at this point.
We have 5 minutes left, and I want to ask one more question, and I'll let you start, Stacy. What accommodations were made for her in school? What accommodations were requested?
Well, she already had a 504 because she was born with a congenital heart defect.
Okay.
We had one in place for her from her middle school forward. I didn't know about them before. Nobody ever even told me about them. And then when this happened in high school, we added to it. However, she missed 120 days, I think, of high school in her senior year.
Yeah.
And she wasn't able to do homeschooling because of her classes. It was just kind of a mess. But anyway, long story short, it was difficult. She was self-teaching at home, basically, with no assistance. It was tough in high school. When she got to the college level, luckily that followed her freshman year in college, which she went away for 1 semester. She wasn't able, she got physically worse and had to come home. But there were accommodations, but the school wasn't really accommodating to them as much as they probably should have been. Now she's taking one class at the college level, and it's amazing. They are so good, but she does all online classes right now. So,
Sandy? I'm sorry. I want to make sure we get to everybody. Sandy?
So Connor was not in school at the time. He was but he was registered in college when he literally just walked out one day and did not withdraw from his classes and ended the semester with 4 Fs. So I will say the one thing that I got an accommodation for him for was that I wrote a petition to the school asking for that to be withdrawn from his record. And when I documented his medical condition, they were very accommodating. So that was the one thing that I had to do on his behalf.
Janet?
Hannah, when she was very young, she went to a private Catholic school, and they didn't do that many accommodations to her. They basically let her go in the elevator because she was in a wheelchair, but they weren't as good. When she finally was able to go to a short period of time to a public high school, and then they got her, she went on hospital homebound after about a week because she was so sick. A wonderful teacher came to our home on weekends, nights, holidays. He was wonderful. He just wanted to help her, and she was so bright, and he just did anything he could to help her get through the classes. So public schools were way more accommodating than private school because they have to be.
Yes. Elizabeth?
We have a complicated story, so I won't get into all the details. I had to fight for everything that she did get. So she did get accommodations, but it was extremely difficult, to put it mildly, of years of fighting and hundreds of meetings, literally meetings and attorneys and you name But she did get hospital homebound. She got tutors that came to our home and would tutor for individual subjects. She got extension for work, things like that. When she was younger in seventh and eighth grade, we had to fight the school a lot, and they tried to kick her out of school. It was a charter school because she was sick. And anyway, very long, complicated story. But after fighting for her rights and being accused of making all this up, we did get her the accommodation she needed, and she graduated eighth grade and went on to pretty much the same battle in high school, although they believed her, but it was difficult to get the accommodations. But we kept fighting, and we did. And she graduated high school, and she's now in college, and now she fights for her own accommodations.
Right.
So, but she
Bambi?
one
I'm
class
sorry.
can't do a lot.
Bambi?
Yeah. Well, fortunately for us, we were already homeschooling when she got sick. In high school, she had mostly outside classes, though, so we had to work with, of course, homeschool academies were very accommodating. Mostly, we had a few we went through. We're like, okay, we're done. But for her, it was more like things like rest when you need to rest. Especially after brain surgery, she took some time off, but she was very motivated. College was easier, a lot easier with the accommodations because she already had all the assessments and all that. Her second master's, they weren't as accommodating because she did not turn in her testing. They wanted retesting, but she's like, I'm 26. I don't want to retest. I'm like, anyways, but
So if you compare what accommodations were or were not done for someone, your children who had chronic pain, I had exactly the opposite with my daughter who's blind. They wanted to offer her more than we needed. So with that, I'm going to thank you very much for your input.